Hello, and welcome to another episode of Coffee and Comics. I'm Todd A.
I'm Taylor Trask. Hey.
Hello. So we're gathering again in the evening. Are you drinking a coffee today, Taylor?
Well, I'm drinking a tea.
Tea and comics, that works.
That's fine. Well, it reminds me of our late night session where we had, I think I had wine that one night. Yeah, or cucumber water. It was something really bougie. But in this case, I'm back.
Water, I believe.
Yeah. I'm back to Starbucks this week. It's
back on that Starbucks bullshit.
Because again, once for the record, and hopefully, if in the event they're listening, this will be a good public service announcement. The local coffee shop down the street from my studio office that I'm in right now is this wonderful little place called Sonder Coffee and Tea. They just happen to not have brew coffee in the afternoon for some bizarre reason. So I have to I don't want to spend $5 on a latte in the afternoon all the time. So I just went to Starbucks and they happen to have this white tea. It's actually the Tivana Defense flavor. So
okay.
I got that.
I love the flavor.
Agave.
That's one of my favorites.
Defense against the dark arts. That's that's what this is. So what about you? What are you rocking this week?
No coffee for me because this is an evening time podcast that we're doing. But I've got an update on last week's pick, which was I just picked up some coffee from a local Orange County roaster called Keen Coffee. I'd gotten the Kenyan roast, and I've got to tell. So I'd left, if you recall, I'd left it sitting in my living room all day, and every time I walked through my living room, I was like, "Oh, this smells so delicious." So I've finally, been enjoying it, actually drinking it, and it is just as amazing as it smelled. So it's going to be hard to motivate myself to try now that I have gotten a couple of roasts where I know sort of the chemistry that we talked about. I know how many scoops and how much vanilla sweetener if I want that and how much milk. It's going to be hard for me to start breaking out and trying more stuff because I keep wanting to go back to the favorites, So.
Oh, yeah. Well, and let's be honest. Once you really get in a nice groove with coffee, it's you want to just stay there as long as possible. At some point, you get tired of it and you move on. But, why chance it, Todd, when you've got such a great blend right in front of you?
Exactly. Well, should we jump right into the comics? I guess if we succinctly explain what we do.
Yes. Well, what we do here on Coffee and Comics is we each have a drink, coffee or tea or some other sort of thing that we talk about. And then we get into reviewing a book, comic, or graphic novel, in the comics world. And it could be anything from an indie pick to, something more mainstream to something really off the beaten path. And we've kind of covered a wide breadth of stuff. You can go back and listen to past episodes and catch up. And you can listen to these anytime. We try to record these so that you don't have to go out, the week that you listen to this doesn't have to be the same week. And we hopefully try to put these out right on New Comics Day, which is every Wednesday. So hopefully you're listening to this on the way to the shop and you'll get something to pick up at the shop and come back and discuss it with us.
Yeah, exactly. I like the way you set that up because it sounds very much like one of our early episodes that I recently re-listened to. Because my pick is Rocket Girl Volume 2.
Of course, you are a Rocket Girl fan. I forgot about this.
Yeah, in our in episode number 46, wherein you talked about Pyongyang, I talked about Rocket Girl Volume 1. This is Volume 2. I think it came out in December.
Okay.
So I went back and listened to our podcast to, hear what the points were that I hit during that one. So the brief story of Rocket Girl is that she is from the year 2013. Mm-hmm. And she time travels back to 1986 to stop the creation of this thing called the Q engine, which is made by Quentin Mechanics. Mm-hmm. And to do that, she runs into some grad students who are working on the original project and works with them to destroy it. And then it is rebuilt, there's similar themes that we have seen before where it's falling into the hands of sort of the, the corporate, the corporation or the state. And there's just some general shenanigans there. And can she rally all the students to help her out and destroy it again? The whole story is set with flashbacks to 2013. And one of the interesting standout ideas in Rocket Girl is that they refer to 2013 as the past, because the idea is She's left 2013 to go to 1986. So now she's actually going to change the eventual 2013. So the 2013 that we're revisiting has actually already happened and won't happen again, in other words. So it's kind of, I mean, you and I talked a little bit about time travel in that episode number 46. And we've talked about it in other sci-fi episodes. So at the end of volume 1, they have destroyed it, and Rocket Girl's suit, which is like a jetpack, and I forgot an important part. In 2013, the police are teenagers. And so she is like 14, 15 something, and she is in the New York teen police force, and her jetpack and suit from the future that has all this technology is it like almost like a police car. It's got sirens and lights on it, and she has a little zapper, and so that's what she uses to fight crime. There are two. The reason they are they're the only ones that can be trusted in the future, the teenagers, because everyone else sort of works for this one corporation. But eventually, that corporation takes over everything, and the teen police force realizes they're about to be obsolete. So they, the main character, Dae-young Johansson, she's the teenage girl that jumps back to 1986 to try to fix all this. Okay, caught up. So at the end of volume 1, she is her suit has been taken from her, and it's in the lab, and she turns off her oh crap, I can't remember what it's called. It's basically like her phone, her tablet, but it's got a Q name because everything in the future is quantum mechanics made. So it's the Q pad or something like that. And it's kind of left with like, oh, is she just going to try to live a normal life? As a teenage girl in 1986. And one of the things that was interesting that you and I brought up was like that specific setting of 1986. Mm-hmm. And I was saying, well, volume 1 was only issues 1 through 5. I don't know if it's going, and like a lot of Image titles, this was a chase scene, from the beginning of that volume. It was like watching a whole season of just a chase, mm-hmm. The security officers who jump back in time to stop her and her quest to destroy this engine so that none of this technology can be invented in the future. So it was pretty like breakneck through those 5 issues. And then we wondered if that setting of 1986 would mean more in subsequent issues. Like, are they, why did they pick that year specifically? Mm-hmm. And so having read volume 2, I can tell you, no, it doesn't really matter. I mean, they picked.
It's just a cool setting to draw stuff that they like. Basically. Totally.
I mean, it may have meant something to the creators. There may be a hidden code in here. So. But it's not. It doesn't become so specific that it is one. The reference you and I made was Stranger Things. Like, is there a reason? Is it like Stranger Things was like in 1982? That whole kind of thing. So, my read of this was I was really kind of bothered by a few things that are storytelling issues that I specifically notice in comics where, one of the issues that came up when you and I discussed volume 1 is how much I love the art of this, which is by Amy Reeder. And we talked about the long time thing that you and I have talked about a lot, which is we will gloss over a bad story if it has great art, mm-hmm. but it's hard for us to pay attention to a great story if it has poor art. And I felt like, oh, I'm into this story and art wise, And in this one, the art continues to be amazing. But there were these things like in comic books, often the way that, this is nothing radical to suggest or like in any way interesting or new, but it's obviously the art and the writing. You can shortcut some things because of that. It's not like a novel where there has to be this exposition that explains, the setting and all that kind of stuff. You can see that visually. Mm-hmm. It's much more like film in that way. Okay. But this takes shortcuts that I specifically notice in other comics that are too short, and it kept bothering me. Like there kept being these jumps from, for example, Dae-young, the girl who's time traveled back, main sort of genius in this laboratory is named Annie. And she, Annie does some things to piss her off. And Dayoung feels like she's got to teach her this lesson. And not teach her a lesson, but she's sort of like, I know the future, and you need to listen to me, and you need to stop thinking about this problem and just act. And she gets angry in this like out of proportion way that lasts through most of the arc.
Oh,
and so as a reader, you're like, I mean, at least I kept going like, oh my God, like what is wrong with this girl? Like this is just way out of proportion for what she's way overreacting. And because of that, all these things, the way it would like sort of skip around, when they would do a flashback, it felt like, I don't know, it just felt like emotionally the story wasn't ready to sort of just jump off of that. It was like there was no resolution. It would just cut back. And now we're in the future where the Quantum Mechanics corporation has shut off all the power, and somehow no one can even see the sun in New York City. And
now, to clarify real quick, and for those of you who didn't listen to the first episode we did on this, as Dayoung is doing things in the past, do you keep flashing forward to see the future change accordingly, or is her future a splinter reality that
Great
is
question.
Separate from what the future is that's being created? Is it like Trunks in Dragon Ball Z, where he can come back and change things, but his future still remains the same?
Well, I don't know anything about Dragon Ball Z.
What? How dare you?
But it is that's a great question, because that's something we as just sort of savvy, time traveling story readers ask. Yeah. And one of the clever things that I wanted to get the writer's name, Brandon Montclair, and Amy Reeder do is they address that question in the book. Mm-hmm. So when it jumps back to the future or the teenage commissioner of the teenage cops, and they have scenes with him, he has to go get Dayoung's original partner, who's also a teenager who lives with her parents, and he has to go recruit her to kind of go on a little mission with him, a little fact-finding investigation. And they have to tell her, well, Dayoung has jumped back into the past. And they have that conversation of like, well, wait, are we living in the future that's already changed? Like, or what's going on here? Mm-hmm. And they know they are going to this Quantum Mechanics Corporation is like the technology is overseen by this person named Joshua. And so, and actually it's in a cool thing, sorry for this aside, but in a cool thing for this volume, they do a recap of all the characters at the beginning of it. So it's really easy to follow, it's really like a real nice recap of like, oh yeah, okay, that's Dayoung and that's Annie and that's
kind of like
the commissioner and Joshua.
Like the Invincible sort of catch up that I mentioned last week.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. I love that Image titles do that from time to time.
Yeah. And Joshua, you're reminded of in the beginning is like, sort of faceless, and mm-hmm. the Joshua is even written like a screen name, with a $ for the S, and it's so mm-hmm. it's sort of like and a 0 for the O, so it's sort of like we don't know who this person is or what power they hold anyway. So the teen commissioner and the two teenage cops that he's recruited to go on this break into Quantum Mechanics, and they basically have that same conversation that you ask about. Like they find some important people there, and they're saying, don't you get it? Like you're already in the future that's been created. Like this mm-hmm. isn't, you can't.
But do they know that? Do they know? Are they saying that definitively, or are they saying that, well, we think this is the case? Like,
well, they say it definitively.
Okay.
And one of the so as I said, I was very frustrated reading this because I felt like, God, these things are like off the handle. I don't get the characterization of some of these things, and it felt like when they were jumping from scene to scene, it was very haphazard. Like it was sort of going at the pace of the first volume where I wanted it to develop more of the story. There's an important flashback which is an actual literal flashback to like 2011 when Dayoung and I think her name's Tosh, her first partner, go out on like one of their missions, and Dayoung is like, hey, screw the rules. We're doing this. we're just going after the bad guys and we know where the bad guys are. And she tries to do this bust and they almost get killed. And she says, okay, we're just going by the book after that. So they establish this thing of like, something has to scare them into going by the book from that moment on. But it almost makes it more jarring because then you're back in 1986 and she's way off the book. And so you're trying to, anyway, that is all to establish that when it gets to the end, the only thing I could find to compare this to is the hold the door moment in Game of Thrones.
Oh my God. That's a pretty big shout out. Wow.
Yeah. Especially because I'm assuming that the work for this was completed before we actually saw that episode. And it's not as, just because of the way it's told and it's a comic, it's not as like mind blowing plot wise. There's just I like trying to say this without spoilers. There are some pieces that you put together in the writing that seriously. So it's like, I'm reading this and I'm frustrated and I was kind of annoyed that I had picked it because I thought, it's going to go by so quickly. I'm not really going to have a lot to say for this. And then this thing happened and I felt so stupid for not putting it together because I'd actually noticed the first part of these clues, like before I started reading it.
Nice.
And I just didn't like synthesize it. Basically, I didn't say it out loud.
No.
And anyway, so
can I ask you? Well, wait, hold that moment. Does it have anything to do with Annie being some sort of future person important in Dai Ying's life that she didn't realize or was involved? Is Annie somehow futurescaping, or is that unrelated?
You're picking up, like you're out of the blue picking up on something interesting, which is like yes, but it works in the reverse. Dai Ying knows who Annie is in the future, but the way they've told this story is so it gives you, the reader, the impression that like she doesn't know Annie's future. And so that is where all that frustration is because she's not saying I know the future. She's saying I know your future.
Wow.
And then they do this thing where I know a lot of people, like when you get to a time travel story or any kind of sci-fi where there have been little clues like that, just any kind of plot, you when it's something you can figure out, a lot of times that feels too tropey or something. And you think like, oh, I saw that coming. Yeah. And you sort of take the wind out of your own sails that way. But this one does a great job of like, you figure out what's going to happen in this big reveal scene, but it's so much more satisfying when you see it get revealed because it's like all of a sudden, all these things that seemed disconnected sort of fall into place.
It's that thing that it's almost like the excitement of knowing the writers are as smart as you hoped they would be comes sweeping through. And it's like, it's that feeling. And I've referenced Lost on this show.
I was going to reference Lost. Yeah.
It's that feeling. Cause like, that's what we want. That's why Lost was such a letdown. Cause you're like, oh, please, surely they know. They know. And even if it ends up being what you think, just the idea, the satisfaction of going, oh my God, they knew, they had a plan. And then when they didn't, it's like, oh,
exactly. And then it made me feel stupid for being frustrated because I ended up being very satisfied. Like I saw it, I was like, oh, I get it. This piece is going to fall here. This piece is going to fall here. And I was like, yes, that is the ending I wanted to this story. And then I figured out that, and then I hit that line where I put the verbal pieces together. And I was so annoyed with myself. Seriously, like just went to bed like angry, like lying in my bed, like I cannot believe I didn't put that clue together because it would. On one hand, it might have spoiled the whole thing. But anyway, I don't want to go too far into that. But what I will say that'll put a perfect cap on this is, it is my understanding that this comic is over. So,
oh my God! After volume 2,
yeah. So that makes me enjoy everything so much more because Holy crap. Like that whole excitement of volume 1, and then the sort of frustration, but then the satisfaction of volume 2. This is like, oh, I'm going to reread these 2 volumes. Like this is going to be a movie that I revisit and watch it because it's still everything in that previous podcast about volume 1. Everything about the art still holds up in this one. Like, it is just, they do this great job of, there'll be big action sequences that are split into these really interesting panel layouts. It's just very colorful, and the characterization of the, each individual character is just right on. Like, none of it looks phoned in, like this is a beautiful looking, but fun comic book. It's not, I kept saying artsy fartsy in our last podcast. I don't know why. But it's not, it's not artsy. It's not weird or something like that. It's just like vibrant and full of action. Like, the action scenes are really awesome. And there's actually little sort of clues that you'll notice in the action scenes that they do a really good job of, like, showing that, like a blast hit the jetpack. And that's, like, there's a scene where there's a blur of a fight, and I'm staring at it going like, I don't understand what part of whose body hit this person. And then the next panel, you see Dayoung's knees are bloody. And I realized, like, oh, she like flipped up and hit him in the face with her knee. And that's why her knee is bloody, because it broke his nose. And it was just very, very cool. So I really, really love this, and even more now that I know it's done. And definitely think, if you're interested in, sci-fi, time travel, just beautiful sort of superhero looking action art, this is for you.
You've sold me. You sold me with the hold the door being a moment, kind of a sort of a moment, and then the fact that this is done. I will say, for those of you listening, if you look at the art, and tell me if you agree or disagree, Todd. It looks like we're almost seeing storyboards for an animated series. Like, it looks like these could easily be panels from just an actual, like, kick-ass Adult Swim, or probably not even that, but just like a really great, like, Toonami sort of show that's just really good and interesting. So, and I guess since we're doing this on video, like, maybe there's a little bit you can see where this is just sort of one of those huge double page layouts, where it's kind of twisted, and it's it is so fun to look at. And yeah, I mean, the only reason I didn't go back and like reread it just to review it for this was I want to go back to volume 1 and read that and read this. And also, last week I did Black Science volume 6, and I have, Saga volume 8, 12, 13, whatever, sitting, waiting to be read. And I was so excited to see the series is wrapped up. Yeah, isn't that great? It's like a British series. It's like a British TV series where they're like, 2 seasons, that's it. That's our vision. We'll move on to something else. Like, I like when there's like, it doesn't have to go like, again, for the 90th time I'll reference East of West. Like, clearly East of West is meant to be this sprawling epic. I like the counterpoint where it's like, nope, here's the story, done. Moving on. Yeah. I mean, it makes it so much more accessible too, where, and East of West, again, I think we both said this in Pyongyang, in that Pyongyang episode number, that I keep referencing, was that I read volume 1 and couldn't get into any more of it, but it's almost not because I didn't like it, but because I really loved it, and I was sort of overwhelmed by, oh my God, there's so many issues I would have to read to catch up. Why don't I just wait till it's all done, all right, and then get omnibus editions or something like that. But anyway, it's this is an easy one to jump into, and I'm going to look up more of Amy Reeder's work, because this is so the style that I love. One more question for our listeners: digital or physical?
Actually, this one, I don't really think it matters. I think in our last episode, you and I talked about, we both, at least you for sure, and possibly me, got the first comic digitally from one of Image's sales. Yep. And if you can find it digitally, I mean, you saw that layout there, but it is made in that way of like a modern comic that I bet the digital version is done really well. I hope it is. I mean, I hope it's got that guided view on it. Oh yeah. I know sometimes Image comics, they just sort of flatly transfer the,
sometimes if you get Image on Comixology's guided view is a little better or different.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, that's a great thing to note, because I've bought a lot of Image stuff directly from the Image store digitally. And that's when at least to my recollection, it's pretty flat, and like you're just sort of swiping the pages. But yeah, I would say get the Comixology versions, or get get it in paperback. It's fun. You'll want to go back to it, but it's not as much as I love the art, I wouldn't insist on having the artifact of this for sure.
Fair enough.
So
fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, my pick, Todd, is one that I have been sitting on for quite a while. I've referenced it in other episodes. It is one of my favorite series, just period, not even current series, but just series period. It's published by Image, and it is They're Not Like Us, Volume 1. And and this is one of those series where you see it's like many Image titles, the graphic art, the logo, the design, the branding, if you will, is really great. You often see, like the covers, the mysterious covers that kind of like Watchmen style feature a panel from that issue, and you see like that logo on it. So oftentimes if you walk into a shop, this is probably something you've run into. It is the greatest, I would say this and No Mercy are the greatest Netflix series that have never been made yet. And it's a book that I desperately hope nobody options until I become a successful director, because I want to make this as a movie or a TV series, preferably a TV series. And the best part is it volume 1 is laid out like season 1 of a show, like right up to like the cliffhanger ending where you're like, oh my God, I need to watch season 2 right now. This is like House of Cards in terms of its structure. Some top line notes, story by Eric Stevenson, art by Simon or Simone Gain. I don't want to presume the gender of this person. And then color by Jory Belair. And it's published by Image, of course, like most of our picks are. But this is a really, really, think about this book as a really indie X-Men story. Okay. It's an and one that nobody's going to be wearing a costume for. This is not unlike Nowhere Men, which is a similar kind of vibe. It's kind of an origin story about a group of people with powers or abilities getting together. That feels a bit more, kind of like, oh, they're going to put on, suits at some point. This is not that. This is the indie movie, very, like what you see here is what you get. Like it's these people, everyday lives. It basically the whole concept of both volumes 1 and 2 centers around this group of teenagers or young 20-somethings with abilities getting together. They're ostracized from society. Again, very X-Men-like. But they get together and they're sort of led by this enigmatic character called The Voice, which is this dude who wears a suit. He's in his early 40s, disheveled. He's got telepathy. So he's a mind reader. And the story starts with volume 1 anyway. It starts with our protagonist. You can see her right here. Maybe. Yep. Her name is Sid or Side. I call her Sid, but some other people call her Side. That's her nickname. You really don't get a lot of her real name, and I'll get into that in a second. But it starts with her. The very first page is she's going to jump off a building and commit suicide, and you really don't know why. But she's talking about how, everybody's afraid of her. She doesn't belong anywhere. And The Voice, kind of the main, the Charles Xavier of this whole thing, walks up behind her and tells her not to jump. She still jumps, but then we cut right away to her in a hospital bed. She's alive, but she's in the hospital. And The Voice and some of the other sort of members of this group sort of sneak her out of the hospital and take her to their mansion. And from there, you learn all about this group of people, where they come from, their backgrounds, and sort of what they're supposed to be doing. What I love about this book is that it's a very nice, slow story that takes all the time it wants to flesh out all these great characters. It doesn't rush through it. There's a pace to everything. Like it never feels like it's just dragging along. And every issue dovetails nicely into every other issue. So I would highly, highly recommend get the trade paperback. Don't delve into the individual issues, and especially because you cannot consume the story 1 month at a time. It's just not going to work. It has to be straight through. And then as soon as you're done with this one, you want to pick up volume 2, which is also out, and just blaze through that as well. Please do that.
So let me ask you, you said something that harkens back to that conversation we had about Rocket Girl Volume 1, which was we had said, a lot of times those Image Volume 1s present this very action-filled story that has a cliffhanger, and it kind of gets you through that first season really quickly. Yeah. This Volume 1, though, you're saying it has a pace, but it still takes its time? It takes its time to give it. There's the arc of what's moving ahead, of what's motivating these people. And actually, Volume 1 tells a concise story start to finish. Oh. So if they never made anything else,
there'd be a lot of loose ends, but you'd feel like, oh, okay, I got a nice little self-contained story. But it ends volume 1 with like, oh shit, now what? And it very much like the ending of a TV season where you're like, that was satisfying, I can stop, but I'm really anxious for what's coming next. And where I think, to answer your question, like, it takes its time to really tell these great character moments, but there's still a drive to that ending. A drive, because you right away, right almost from maybe the middle of I was going to say episode 1 of issue 1, you get this sense that there are certain characters in conflict with others, but you don't quite know why. And they sort of drop these things in. So as moments happen and interactions happen, they don't feel foreign or forced. You're just like, oh, that's what this is about. That's what that look was that he gave this other person. Like, this is, it doesn't spoon feed you anything. You just got to pay attention and kind of delve into it.
So are they a superhero squad?
No, the big difference, I would say, some really interesting themes. One of the biggest ones is just the idea of teenage rebellion. The group of people that are assembled, they're all, from different walks of life, but there's very much a rebellious spirit to all of them. They're taking on new names, new identities. They're sort of, they're going out into the world and like kind of doing whatever they want. Like, there's one scene that's kind of a little disturbing where they trick a guy into basically handing over his really awesome vintage headphones, and because they just take what they want. And that's something that the voice, the main guy, kind of injects into their thinking. He very much, it's almost kind of like the voice is Charles Xavier, but with Magneto's sort of superiority complex, but like with a lot of money, and he's kind of lazy and doesn't care. So it's like he's constantly telling them, like, we're better than everybody else. Like, this is, you've been ostracized too long. So it's that dry, that sort of Pinocchio Island, kind of aspect. The other thing, I think the other big theme is just the idea of discovering yourself and where you fit in the world. Things that X-Men do very well, but this does a very sort of very grounded take on it. And so through Sid, the main protagonist, you see all these other characters, but you also get really into her head, why she thinks what she does, why where she agrees or disagrees with the voice or the rest of the group. Alliances are formed, and like any group in this situation, it's treated very, very. I believe every single thing that these characters are doing. Like, this is exactly what would happen, which is great. So I think the abilities or the powers are, they're very understated. You see them demonstrated, but it's not like, this isn't about like waiting, to page 10 where you see somebody fly. It's not about that. It's about the internal drama of these characters who can kind of do whatever they want. And how do they relate together? How do they relate to the rest of the world or the outside world? Another thing that I love about it is the art. It's strange. The art, normally I wouldn't like this kind of art because it's very pencil driven, like it's got, oops, there we go. It's got like, you can tell like this was meant to be like in somebody's notebook, right? It's like, it's got that very, it's not digital like East of West is, or even like Rocket Girl. It's got that, there's some rough edges to it and it was colored in, but it works so well for this story. It gives it an extra sense of sort of organic feel to it that I think, again, downplays the normal comic bookiness of a superhero story. Like, this is not a superhero story. This is a story about people with abilities and problems and how they sort of fit together, again, like X-Men. But it's almost like they intentionally did everything they could to make it as indie and hipster as possible, but still tell some of, kind of delve into some of those themes.
So remind me, are you reading Nowhere Men, or have you read it? Okay.
I'm reading
Nowhere Men. Same writer.
Is it? I think it is. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. It's interesting that it is, because Nowhere Men's on hiatus.
Okay.
And it keeps going back and forth. Like, volume 1's up and then volume 2 is kind of done, but not. But you can tell like there's, they're probably setting it for 6 volumes, but who knows when we're ever going to get those. They're Not Like Us seems to be on a nice schedule. I think they took a little time off, but volume 2 is already out. They're working. I think the next round of issues is coming out as we speak. I have to wait. I can't pick up the individual issues because I need to, like I said, I need to consume it all at once.
Yeah, I noticed that volume 3 comes out in May. But it looks like there was a 2-year gap between volume 2 and volume 3.
Yeah, it took some time.
1-year gap between 1 and 2. So have you read volume 2 yet?
Oh yeah, I own volume 2 as well.
Okay.
And just a quick shout out to volume 2. It's not, if you get through volume 1, you're like, God dang it, I need to go keep going. And you get volume 2. it's still good, but it goes a lot slower. Like I said, there's a
actually, that was what I was going to ask, was if it sort of picked up in volume 2.
No, I mean, there's a feeling of like, as scenes happen in volume 1, you feel like, oh, this is the next day, or, this is a week later, like, time's just kind of moving and we're dropping in at very specific moments. So that adds to the feeling of the story progressing. Volume 2 is more about like, there's a little of that, but a lot of volume 2 happens in the same room over the course of the same 2 hours. And you're just like, but it introduces some really meaty sort of character moments too. So it's a different kind of story than volume 1, but still worth it. And again, this series, this should be optioned now. Like this I can't stress that enough. It's such a great, like, I want to see this on TV. It would be so easy and cheap to do. I mean, you could do it the same budget or less than like Jessica Jones. I mean, and in fact, that's a great sort of comparison point. Like, as you never think of Jessica Jones as a superhero with a costume and like, this is very much like, I should have thought of this from the beginning. If you like Jessica Jones on Netflix, like this is very much in that vein, like even the voice is kind of very Purple Man-esque. He doesn't do sinister, like sick crap like the Purple Man does, like Kilgrave does, but it's still that kind of like very kind of similar sort of character. In fact, it was funny, before Jessica Jones came out, I was thinking, oh, it'd be great to see David Tennant in this role of the voice. And then they cast him as Kilgrave. So there's a lot of sort of comparisons to be made to Jessica Jones.
So is you touched on this, that it's character driven. Is volume 1 mostly Sid's story, or does it get into moments with all of them? I mean, do you really feel like you know all of these characters?
You feel like you know most of them. There's a couple they leave out intentionally for story reasons, but you do, like, you see it through Sid's eyes, but you do definitely see like other people in the house, how long she has little conversations with them. She, there's another character who's he's deaf in real life, or he's mute in real life, but he can bring Sid into sort of his mind VR world, and there they can talk to each other and stuff. And so you get to hear more about his, there's a relationship kind of forming between those two. And he's sort of her Morpheus. He trains her, in this mind world and everything. So there's a lot of little things like that too, but you get, the only one you don't really, there's a kid who's kind of, you don't know what his deal is. And then the voice you learn a little bit about, but they intentionally keep him kind of opaque, and you learn a lot more about him in volume 2. Because this isn't a spoiler so much, but as the story progresses, you get the increasing sense that Sid and the voice are going to be at odds sooner or later, and just sort of how that could happen, or why she would deviate from him. Like that's worth paying attention to.
So do you get the idea that the story is progressing towards an end in that way, or is it just kind of open-ended, like they're just going to keep building this world?
I mean, there's definitely somewhere it's going, because even by the end of volume 1, some pretty very specific, very final kinds of things happen. So there's got to be a plan, but it does feel like, instead of, I don't necessarily think they have 6 years all mapped out. I think, again, much like a TV season, they're like, hey, we know what the next season's going to be, but after that, we've some loose ideas. But every year we come back and map it out and then do that season. Then we go away and take a break and then come back again. I think it's more like that.
Well, I think this is probably should be a recurring theme in you and I talking about comic books, specifically Image stuff, because I've thought a lot about that Black Science volume that I talked about in our last episode, and how the way, I thought this was heading to a wrap up kind of thing. I thought there was an end in sight, and it seems now at volume 6 there is no end in sight. It's really just an ongoing sort of space series. It's like just Star Trek or whatever. But it would be very hard for them to wrap it up in that nice, satisfactory way now, because pretty much every volume has a climax. Yeah. And so I was just thinking about that as you were saying that volume 1, if They're Not Like Us, how it could be its own standalone story, like it comes to a conclusion. So that just makes me think like, oh, well, so maybe there isn't going to be a big, huge climax. Maybe that's a thing for us to watch in Image comic books, I think that's what threw me about Rocket Girl Volume 2 was I kept waiting, like, why don't, is this actual confrontation going to happen in Volume 3? Like, why is there all this agitation here? But it just turned out like, no, they're just going to resolve it all. They're
definitely heading towards something. What that
some
is,
kind of showdown.
Some kind of showdown, but who that involves is very fluid right now. And like they're still introducing new characters in volume 2, so who knows?
Yeah.
And maybe it's one of those things where like Oblivion song I reviewed last week. Maybe it's one of those things where the end, where we end up is very, very different from where we started.
Right.
But there's definitely like, I don't know. It's one of those things where, how like you see a story. I'll liken it to the ending of Justice League, the movie, where at the movie ends. I know it's a terrible comparison, but like at the ending of that movie,
wondering like, which ending?
Wait, it ends. You're like, well, that's the end of the story. But then like Lex Luthor's on his boat or his yacht, and he's like, well, maybe we should. There's that kind of a twist at the end where you're just like, oh, this will keep going, And it doesn't have to, but I mean, I'm glad it does. But yeah, it's great. I would say to answer my digital physical question, I think you could get it in. I mean, I think it could work in both, just like Rocket Girl. But there's something about sort of the way they organize the panels, seeing what's coming, does sort of, it makes the story feel a little bit more, I don't know, I like it a little bit better. But I think you could definitely, the panels are pretty straightforward. I think you could definitely get this in digital and be just as happy. One of the things I do like about physical, though, is that they've got all their great sort of like infographic-y things that they do. Yeah. These are all like, this just says, find your truth, face your truth, speak your truth, be your truth. Like there's all these kind of like youth and rebellion kind of memes scattered throughout. So I like that it does sort of help.
That's a great thing.
Lock in the story.
We should also point that out when we read physical over digital, because in Rocket Girl Volume 1, at least at the end, there's like bits of the script and stuff like that. And actually Volume 2 as well. Like, so, you're getting like kind of the DVD extras or whatever sometimes in the print version.
And sometimes you get them in digital too. They're just not as satisfying, like one of the reasons a previous pick I had was, Fairyland. I hate Fairyland. Yeah, I hate Fairyland. The hardcover edition. You want that physicality of it because it feels like a storybook, but it also has like a bunch of DVD extras, like you said. That you want that on your shelf with all that stuff in it. It just feels better. And so I think if they put this out in an omnibus version when they're all said and done, or at least organize volumes 1 through 3, I think I'll swap out my trades and get that because I do want it in one big version, but the trade is just as good.
Yeah. I got to look into this. Did you know Comixology has an unlimited subscription for $6 a month? We're not paid by Comixology or anything, but I got to look into it because it's not like every title's available. But in some of these things like this, I would love to read a few issues, of They're Not Like Us to see if I'm into it, and then pick up like an omnibus edition or something, and I don't know if it's an ongoing series like that. So do you have any like news or inclination that it's going to run for a while?
I hope so. I'm going to look up an image right as we speak.
Yeah. I mean, I pulled it up and I just saw that date for volume 3, but no real news there.
Yeah. My guess is the creators who work on this work on other stuff.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
I think it's one of those things where if they can get in a nice groove again, that's awesome. And volume 3 is coming out, and you can even see like volume 3's cover sort of suggests where the story's going.
Okay.
So I'll throw that. If you're looking, you're like, whoa, that's about like that's.
So is that the voice on the left?
Yeah.
Okay.
So and Sid is on the right. So you're kind of, it's again, that's not a spoiler because the journey is so much more satisfying than just simply knowing that. I mean, you get a sense of that from basically issue 1, but how we get there and why we get there and how the characters evolve in the process is way more interesting.
Cool. Man, another 2 image picks for us.
Mm-hmm. Really solid ones. These are the kinds of image books that make me love Image all the more because you would never see these otherwise. The Image, when you sort of have a really nice plan and a schedule and you really, you've got a great team to pull it off, Image is a great platform for you. And I'm really excited to see where volume 3 goes. And hopefully I'll be back in May with that review.
Yeah, perfect. Well, you don't have to wait till May for another episode of the Todd and Taylor Show Coffee and Comics edition. Where can people find us, Taylor? You can find us anywhere podcasts are listened to: Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, SoundCloud. And you can also find us online. We are at findusthere.org. Sweet. And we're on all social media as Find Us There. We've got a couple of podcasts on hiatus. Speaking of things on hiatus, and hopefully they will all return shortly for you to enjoy them as well.
Yes.
Thanks very much. Until next time. I don't know. We don't actually have an ending. Until next time, we're us.
We're us.
All right. See you, Taylor.